continue to pay for its upkeep. The million-dollar homes would never have been built and the land would still be vacant. We were never told that the taxpayers have to pay for all enhancements with no cost in the future. In theory, this might work, but the reality is that nobody takes the managers to task, and we hear excuse after excuse for poor management without accountability. We should not use the general fund for poor management shortfalls. Before we jump into a theoretical policy, we should have full accounting on the probabilities and shortfalls of this policy change. More discussion is needed. Thank you for listening, and I'll post all my comments on Simsbury.com, Simsbury Patch, Simsbury Topics. Got a lot of things to put it on. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to?
Hi, Barbara O'Connor, 39 Joshua Drive. I'm here as a representative of the Simsbury Tourism Committee, and I would like to present a resolution that we approved at our meeting, our regular meeting held on September 15th. After a lively discussion of the benefits or disadvantages of the town purchasing the property there at 1 Old Bridge Road, the Tourism Committee adopted the following motion: that the committee supports the town of Simsbury determining a way to acquire the Betty Hudson property at 1 Old Bridge Road for the purpose of creating a serene and natural park next to the river as a complement to the Flower Bridge and to attract visitors to enjoy the river views. This was based on the committee's experience over the summer of participating in the Connecticut tourism effort to find the best towns in Connecticut. And what came across in that program was that the Flower Bridge is a treasure to the residents here and a real attraction to visitors from out of town. It's a favorite place for wedding photographs. It's for picnics. It's just for yoga, for meditating, for relaxing and enjoying the river views. And we as a committee feel that adding this property to that area will just only enhance that destination in town. Thanks.
Do we have a vote from them? That statement that you read, do we have
it was in the minutes, and
Could we put a copy in?
I actually have a copy of the minutes that
I'll take it.
but they're filed on there.
Get it at the end.
Would anyone else like to speak?
Yeah, Jerry Nunder, 22 Masako Street. And I thought I would have to give a background on Consider the Source because I'm so old and it's been so long since I've done anything. I thought the whole board would have changed, but wow, you guys are getting old too. So for better or worse, you know my pluses and minuses. And yeah, I'm a bit of a tree hugger, and I am really for quality of life in Simsbury and keeping people who built the town, make it affordable for them to stay here. At the same time, Joan and I'm amazed, actually had an agreement on something years back. Yes, we did, on the Ethel Walker property. And while I thought part of it, the aquifer, was a wonderful idea, when it came to losing revenue for the town, I'm a tree hugger, but if you need the tree for a house, for shelter, then sometimes you got to cut a tree. That's done. An income opportunity through taxes is lost there. I'm also in agreement with everything that was said by the next speaker, but I also think you can make an economic case for this. And anybody living in town for a while, and Jan and I are almost at half of our age, having lived here, knows that the Board of Finance really controls what happens here. So you people are sitting in a mighty position, and you do have to look at it from an economic sense. In addition to the volunteer efforts that lend a quality of life, for 5 years, I was the executive director of the Main Street Partnership and worked closely with economic development. This is a money maker. It's not a money loser. I mean, I can't imagine that anybody is going to leave that house standing. I mean, Betty is a good friend. She loved the place. If you've been in it, I mean, what she did to it to allow the water to run through the basement several times a year doesn't make the house marketable as a resident. And it certainly wouldn't be something you should try to maintain as a town. So I believe the price you can get it for when the negotiation is done is going to be minimal. And if you volunteer in the bridge, you get people from Germany, China, all over New England who stop by and say, oh, they read about the bridge, they came down there. Part of the challenge you all have who work on committees in town is how do you keep the unique character of Simsbury, make it affordable for the people who built it, and part of that is bringing in people that are going to contribute to its sustenance. Now we, as the Old Bridge Flower Committee, are next year republishing the restaurants, so that we used to have that down at the bridge where you could go for this type of food, that type of food. People that come down there, the kayaking with the triathlon, I thought was a great idea. You do see yoga people on boards out there. So if you see a reasonable number of people, the kind of people who appreciate the quality, who appreciate nature, coming into town, you don't come and zip out. You do that if you're going to stay for a couple of days, you stay over. Or otherwise, you have lunch someplace. And that all contributes to the finances in a very healthy way and supports our local people. So, I as an individual want to say, come on guys, this one is a no-brainer, please.
Well, thank you. We're going to let the public speak, then we'll open it up. Back to the left.
Hi, I'm Deej McKay, 15 Woodside Circle. I'm co-chair with Shereen Wassel of the Drakeville Flower Bridge. And we had firmly believed as a board that we wanted to support the acquisition of Betty's home. And we also believe it keeps, it also goes along with the 2007 Plan for Conservation and Development. The under natural resources, Objective C, encourage acquisition of land or public access rights where feasible to land adjacent to the Farmington River for active and passive recreation use. Objective C, under the Planning Commission objective, increase access to the Farmington River for launching and landing canoes, kayaks, and rowing, craft for fishing and other recreation. This year we were very honored to get the Yankee Magazine's designation of the Flower Bridge as the best bridge stroll in New England. And as a result, we have many new visitors to Simsbury. The bikers, hikers, visitors, picnickers, gardeners all make daily use of the bridge and the area surrounding it. There are day trips by special needs groups that appreciate the wheelchair accessible picnic tables and the accessible bridge. We definitely feel that acquiring Betty's property would be pivotal going along with the tourism too, and enhancing the whole bridge area and making it a greater destination. If the town decides to purchase the bridge, the Flower Bridge Committee would like to ask if the storage shed, as you face the property on the left side, could be kept so that we could store equipment permanently there. Betty was a member of the Flower Bridge, so we borrowed all sorts of tools from her. We put baskets on her property when a hurricane was coming, but now we don't have that pleasure. So that would be great if we could use it, the storage shed, if the town purchases property for us. And we thank you for considering our recommendation.
Now, I believe you have a letter we had in our package.
Yes.
From the Flower Bridge, so that's good. Thank you. Chris?
Rick Wagner, 152 Old Farms Road, Simsbury. Joan, I think you're right on as far as looking at this with a cold hard eye and saying, okay, is it going to give us economic benefit? Should we be in the real estate business? And I kind of have the same sympathy that we've given away a lot of land, open space, to taking off tax rolls. We got 1/3. I don't know how much it is that's off the tax rolls now. But this one is a little different. I think this one is going to be something that we'll look back on 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now and say that for a small amount of money, it's not the millions of dollars like what my family gave like $1.5 million worth of open space. And I'm not sure that's going to give any economic benefit to the town. In fact, it's probably a decrease because you can't put the mansions on it. However, this one, I think, is going to really pay off in the long run.
I would like to say, I'm Jen Littner, 22 Misako, and I'm secretary at the Flower Bridge. But the other day, Susan Olson, who owns the property on the east side, northeast side of the river, has had her property surveyed. And if you go out there, her property literally touches the abutment of the bridge. So much of the gardens that we do on that side are really on her property, and it's fine with her because we take care of it. So that whole open space doesn't really belong to the bridge. So it's my hope that the town has the opportunity to protect our flank. On the other side, you have the picnic tables to the north, and then Betty's property on the south side of the west side of the bridge. And I think it's a real opportunity to be able to get to the river and then help enhance the bridge itself. So I hope that you will support this effort.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
We were just, Evelyn Holland, 7 Ashton Circle. I'm vice chair of the Flower Bridge, and we were discussing today that there really is no access to the river for, like kayakers or canoers. Because if you go down by the, where the sycamore tree is, they open that up, but down there you have families coming with swimmers, and people are trying to launch their canoes, and people are in the river swimming, and it's really, a big confusion. The other place is up the road from the Flower Bridge, but that's state property, so really, other than, up by Curtis Park, and there in the center of town, there's no access to the river. So, we thought that this would be a perfect place to have it. You've got the picnic tables, you've got the bridge, you bring everybody there. So, I think we are in agreement that this should be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? All right, I'll end public audience. Any comments? Oh, I'm sorry.
Richard Johnston, 29 Ridge Road. My question to the group is, are you planning to totally level the house and then improve and put in boat docks and such there? Or is the house going to stay there and be used for some other purpose?
I think there's going to be a presentation. We'll find out the intent of what they want to do with it when we have the presentation. So I can't answer that. I think people doing the presentation will answer that. Anything else? Any other? No. All right. Anyone else like to speak? I'm sorry, I missed you. But all right, I'll close public audience. Any questions from our board? Linda, you want some observations?
I had a question for Jerry.
Okay.
You mentioned about, I was following you carefully, but I got lost at one point. It sounded like you were saying you thought we could buy the house for less money.
Yeah, it's on for what? $245, $246, $264.
Yeah, but we're only going to pay
The town offered $150.
So, but what you were saying was no one's going to buy it.
Nobody's going to buy it
So
for $260.
are you making the point that you still think $150 is too much, or does that sound reasonable?
Oh, I think that sounds very reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
and
it
I
wasn't
do
clear
think
what your
that
point was.
if you get creative with this, and the current owner look at it in some way where this is potentially a gift at a disadvantage financially to that person, there's potentially tax credit possibilities, and people get creative. The 150 is just like, oh, come on, you're going to recoup that so quickly in local businesses, it'll be hard to track. But I'm surprised they're not here tonight, because they do talk about it, and we get asked, where can I go for this kind of food or that kind of food?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions or observations? All right. I think we have a presentation on this. We have information in our package on...
You have information in your package. This is set up for the second part of the meeting.
Okay, well, perhaps we can go through the information. Somebody can kind of run us through it so we can kind of get a little... Mr. Cook, would you be willing
Certainly,
to
we can. I'll lead the
it?
charge here. I've got, fortunately, the town engineer and the director of planning behind me, so guys jump in if and when I go off track. I think, as you all know, this has been approved by the Board of Selectmen. It's been through the Planning Commission. It's you have the Tourism Committee support, and of course the folks at the Flower Bridge. In addition to the positive reasons for moving forward that I think were presented to the Board of Selectmen, there are a couple of existing policy reasons, and those were spelled out, I think, in the materials you got. One was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers, and that is that this purchase is consistent with the POCD, the 2007 POCD, in terms of use of this area. The second is a more recent, actually not more recent, there's an emergency hazard mitigation plan that was approved both by the Planning Commission and by the Board of Selectmen. which discusses the goal of removing residences from floodplains. And this has been an issue over time with that property. It has regularly been flooded. It is not a particularly good place for residence. So it does present potential risks both to residents there and to our emergency personnel when we have flood situations. So quite apart from the development potential, there are good reasons for this not to be on the market as a residence any longer. That said, I think town staff has taken a look at the house, securing it safely and keeping it as is can be done within the margins of the monies that have been requested of you. I think once the place is secured, other than mowing the lawn and just keeping the outside secure, there shouldn't be any further expenditures just in terms of keeping it status quo. That in turn will allow, in essence, a phase 2, which would include a town staff evaluation of the property, of the options available to the town in terms of use, exploration of potential funding, for example, grant monies from FEMA. There are a number of things that have to be explored. I think that they can't be explored quickly. They will involve input, I think, from a lot of the committees that have been involved to date. What we have is a property that's adjacent to the Flower Bridge and to existing town-owned property. There's a lot of potential for use there. So I think that's, in a nutshell, I believe the Board of Selectmen felt that this was an opportunity to take care of, to buy some potential access for recreational use.
Can you kind of walk us through the money, saying that we're a money board?
Sure.
You know, 150,000.
150,000, exactly.
And then an additional amount.
There's an additional amount, correct. There is.
Can you walk us through what that's for?
Okay, and I may turn that over to Jeff, who put that together, but that will include a large piece for the potential demolition of the property and then some maintenance costs.
Yeah, what we did is, Peter has just identified some costs by contract. Some of this stuff probably might be able to be done with town staff, but we looked at the worst case. Things that would need to be done, such as securing the building at a cost of $250, possibly for some lock set changes, maybe some boarding up, securing some openings, reviewing the septic system so that we don't have any environmental hazards down the road in terms of pumping the system out, making sure it's secure relative to its proximity to the river. Winterizing the plumbing system, if in fact the building is going to be mothballed for some period of time. Looking at the furnace, cleaning and inspecting the furnace, again, if it's going to be active, and again, that's kind of uncertain at this time, we would want to look at the furnace, make sure it's clean, it's functioning, it's economical, to run relative to its adjustments. We're looking at rodent control, insect control, see if there's any issues there. Again, if it is going to be repurposed, we want to nip that in the bud, so we may want to do an inspection. Securing the driveway, simple things like barricading the driveway so it's not, accessible to whoever that shouldn't have access to it. Possibly installing an alarm system, again, if it's potentially a target for vandalism, we may want to consider that, so we add some money in the budget for that. There's a fence at the top of the retaining wall. It's functioning right now, but it's something we may want to replace to make sure that there's no accidents when people are actually on the property. We also added some money for mowing if it was done by a contract at $1,000 a season. Again, that's probably pretty conservative, but we just want to have a placeholder for that.
So you estimate for those type of items, is that 5,000, is that right?
That was for those short-term items.
Short-term items. But you might not need that money if you do the long-term plan?
Well, that's possible. Yeah, that could be significantly reduced depending on how we use it in the short term. But yeah, that's kind of a moving target right now.
Why don't you kind of walk us through the long term? The one thing you left out in the short term is on the insurance. You had additional flood insurance. Does that just get added on? Will it be a cost?
We did talk to Kerm on that. Again, because at the time we talked to them, we were actually anticipating demolition We didn't really get into any costs
So if there's
associated with it.
demolition, there's no cost? If the house stays, there's some cost?
Correct. In terms of long-term plan, again, we budgeted for demolition and hazardous material removal. We would have to have an inspection done by a licensed environmental professional to determine what materials would need to be removed. We would then need a contractor to come in and remove those materials. We did identify asbestos tile in one of the rooms, so we know there's some remediation that would be required prior to demolition. And we actually compared some of the costs for Dewey Farm demolition that we had garnered through procurement before we had the fire department step up and help us with that. The square footage is similar, so we budgeted about $20,000 for demolition, $5,000 for hazardous material removal, and
So that's taking the whole building down? That's what
that is. Yes.
Including the shed?
The shed is not a permanent structure, so I think that could be relocated if need be.
So Peter, can I just ask a question right now?
Sure.
The way number 4 is written, which was what led to my confusion a bit, it says obtain a bid for hazardous material removal, demolition, and restoration of the site.
Right.
It doesn't say that it's for the full cost of the demolition and everything. It says it's the cost to obtain a bid.
Right, bid for both hazardous material and demolition.
But it's not just the
So
bid.
they may be
But we want not just the bid, we want it down.
It'll accomplish it.
Yeah, we would just, follow our normal procurement process.
That's not $25,000
Miles.
is what it is.
Well, that's what it says.
That's what it says.
That's
That's
why
why
I got to be
Right.
that was the combined cost, estimate cost.
That's correct. It will cover
We
the
have a
cost
few
of the
lawyers on our
demolition.
board, so you have to be a little more technical. How you describe
I was
that.
confused by it as well.
We have 3, don't we?
I had a question relative to the amount of the request, which is $200,000. I think the total short and long-term costs and acquisition totaled $186. So is there an additional amount for the $14,000 difference that isn't included in the package?
I think actually after discussions internally, people thought that there might be something missing that maybe we didn't anticipate, and we should have a contingency in the budget, so we did add some additional dollars for that purpose.
It would be a lot easier to return the money to you than to come back a second time for $5,000 or $6,000 if that's what was
It's
needed.
reasonable to have a contingency, so you
Right.
should probably just say contingency so much.
Correct.
And it spells it out.
Have you looked at the possibility, someplace in this it notes that the land is a little over half an acre. Is there going to be a need if we develop the property and do, as I think somebody suggested, docks and places to launch kayaks and things of that sort? Are we going to have to acquire land adjacent to this property as well?
No.
Who does own the land adjacent to it?
Actually, Old Bridge Road was the former Drake Hill Road prior to the bridge being replaced.
I was thinking more to the where the wetlands are and so forth, not where the road is.
The property line, and we don't know exactly where it is along the brook, but it's essentially consistent with the center line of the brook that runs. I think it's Hot Brook that runs to the west.
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure whether, in order to do some of the kinds of development things we were talking about, we'd have to acquire more land or do. That's a fairly steep drop off there, and it's not exactly the easiest place to, cart a kayak or a canoe in and out.
It's actually quite level down by the water, Nick. But
Where the brook is.
And I should never do this. I think I heard at one point that Ensign Bickford owns some of the land, right
They
next
own
to
the land up towards the Eno.
side.
They do actually, the property abutting us to the west is owned by a subsidiary of ED.
Yeah.
How about where the garage is? And that's a little lower than the main house, because that's where it tends to flood through the garage.
Right.
So I assume that's a little lower down the river. I haven't walked it.
It is.
Anybody?
Well, the basement floods too.
I've walked it.
You walked it?
Yeah, the furnace is movable.
I went and gave myself a tour of the yard, and one side of it, as you're facing the house, the side closest to the bridge, has a retaining wall and is quite steep, but on the other side, behind the garage, it's a very gradual.
That's correct.
And you could easily launch a boat or walk into the water
That's
there
water access.
without building anything. I mean, I think ideally it'd be nice to have sort of a, a bit of a dirt path or
Right.
cinder path to get in and out more easily, but
In fact, the
Could you
water
speak-
right down there's quite calm.
Quite
It would be a
calm.
fairly
Tom,
easy
could you
place.
just speak to the urgency? I mean, everyone says, gee, why aren't we going through the normal process? Why are we considering this outside the budget process?
Well, I think this has been driven by the fact that the timing wasn't really in our control. The house went on the market when it did. You have the sellers are, of course, anxious to complete the transaction. One might delay it. On the other hand, again, remember that part of the goal here was to get a residence off of the market, perhaps to get it to avoid a bidding war, to remove a property from the market that really shouldn't be there. It is, that property flooded regularly. It is a terrible place for a house. It is a great place for other things.
How about value for our money? I mean, Mr. Opinion over there that it's a good deal. Do we have other opinions? Is it a good deal, what we're paying, the $150?
It's certainly under the market value. Again, the assessor, it's assessed for easily $50,000 more than this. The family's delighted that we're planning to use it for public purposes, and they look forward to seeing something to honor Ms. Hudson. So it happened to, I think, work out very well in both the timeline and the intended use categories.
Could you speak for a moment to item 5 in the long-term plan? It says review possible abandonment of Old Bridge Road. I don't know that the Flower Bridge is thinking that we're going to lose a parking lot and a road there.
This is why this has to be a pretty widely based process when we come up with a plan for this. There are a lot of different interests down there. There's a lot of potential, but I don't think, and part of why you don't have a specific plan in front of you is it's going to take some time to do. I think, as you heard tonight, there's a general agreement that this is a piece of land that ought to be owned by the town and used for public purposes.
But there's general consensus that there's going to still be a bike path through there, right? And places for people to come down and...
I would certainly assume so, yes.
I still like driving my car over that bridge.
No.
My wife didn't like it when I drove over.
I can imagine.
Laura,
Yeah, to that point, and I guess I'm not a policy maker anymore, right? I'm oversight.
money is policy.
Right. But I'm going to say it anyway. I am concerned, and I know we didn't have control over the timing, and we have a lot of groups, different groups advocating for the purchase of it, and I'm concerned what's going to happen when we purchase it. We don't really have a vision. We have about 10 different visions of it, and these groups may become at odds with each other if one's planning on getting rid of a parking lot or closing down the road.
I don't think there's any group right now that's really planning to get rid of the road. I think.
Well, I'm just using that as an example.
But that's a good example.
Or suppose,
Yeah.
the tourism committee was referring to it as a serene and natural park. So are they going to get upset if we're now launching boats down there and it's not as serene anymore?
Well,
and I guess that's not my job anymore, but
No,
I'll bring it up.
But this is the community of the charrette, fortunately, and I think
we
that
can't
that's...
argue about it unless we buy it, though, so I
But
don't
it's likely to revert to the Parks and Rec Commission to oversee this.
In terms of oversight, I would agree with that, Nick, yes.
Could you go through the cost again? I mean, it was what, on the rolls for, how much are they paying now in taxes?
$5,260.
So the pure economics are, we tear it down, we spend $200,000. House goes, you got brass there, we lose $5,200. We now have the intangible asset, call it intangible, meaning it's going to be hard to figure the benefits. And now we have a benefit, an asset intangible that now helps other businesses. So I think, as I go through this thought process, because when it first came to me, I was kind of, what are the pluses and minuses? So I just listed. And so as slowly as I think through it, the intangibles are the things that are harder to get your hands around. So as you start thinking through it, and I'm a supporter of the Flower Bridge. I think I have a basket up there, so I think it's been a good resource to the town, even though I used to like driving over it, it's more enjoyable to walk over it.
Probably safer now.
Safer. But I can see that it's going to take some time to get the vision. In my mind, I don't think we're instantly going to have that vision, but the water is precious to this town. It's a fiber of this town, I see it. And you got some possibilities. They're probably going to come back to us for more money down the road. Probably won't be a year or two when they get the vision. But for now, this would stabilize the situation. You're not going to come back and say, gee, we missed by 40,000 or 100,000, or we now need to do this or that. This budget request will stabilize, could level the house, get all hazards away, and worst case scenario is we're just mowing the lawn.
That's right.
I move.
So,
we
got a long way to go before you can move this.
We can move and still discuss it.
So I called and did ask a question right on this line because, and I'd like a chance at some point to talk to some of the issues Joan raised, but this particular one that concerns me is the leaving open the option of keeping the house or not keeping the house, and the fact we haven't been able to decide that. And as a Board of Finance, we really are about, what can we afford and the timing of this and everything. And my concern is, do we really know the ongoing cost of keeping this? And we just got hit with a surprise at the Walker properties that, while we told, when the voters approved it, we didn't share with them there was going to be an ongoing maintenance cost to keep the Walker properties. I just want to make sure that we ask all the right questions on this property, and that if the house is kept, because there's no commitment here to get rid of that house. I own a house, and quite frankly, I have to do more than mow the lawn. It just doesn't stay there by itself year after year with nothing being done. There's a cost to keep a house, and I don't care what condition you keep it in. Unless it's falling down, you let it fall down, there's a cost to keep it. So I asked if town staff could look at this ahead for me and just get us a little more comfortable with what's the range of exposure here if somebody decides to keep this building.
I think the answer to that is really how much the building is going to be used, how often do you have to heat the building. It's 2,200 square feet. And typically, it's oil heat there. If you're going to have that building heated for several hours a day, obviously there's a cost associated with that. There's electricity costs, water. I don't know how much water you'd actually use. So it'd be utility costs, minor repairs probably to the roof. We didn't really look at the building, though, in terms of repurposing it and what the cost would be.
I think the primary reason for hanging onto the building for a short term, Barbara, is to figure out whether or not we need that footprint, and whether for something else, whether it be something to do with the boat launch, or it's not clear. But the goal is not, as I understand it from the board, is not to keep that house running in perpetuity. What we're trying to do is lock it away for the time it's going to take to figure out what we're going to do with the property. But I don't believe there's any intention to run that property on.
What they're asking for right now essentially winterizes the house, drains all the lines, removes the heat.
Exactly.
There should be absolutely zero ongoing cost.
Perhaps Lisa could just, you're on the Board of Selectmen that voted for this. Perhaps you could tell us what your conversation was on that.
On the long-term purposes? Right. Well, I think, when we purchase it, we do view it as an economic asset. We have from the marketing study, the shreds, that the river is an underutilized asset. All of them said that if you want to attract high technology, industry, financial, they're looking for high amenity areas, like things that put you to the top of the 50 most wonderful towns in the world, which we continually rank on. So it's consistent not only with the POCD, but with the marketing study and with the shred. So we do view it as an economic asset. In terms of long-term plans, we haven't had a full discussion, but to Moira's point, we do believe that we have to engage a lot of groups. The Flower Bridge, tourism, local businesses, because as Jerry pointed out, it actually is an attraction to local businesses. I had someone from out of town stop me the other day and said, can you direct me to the Flower Bridge? A total stranger. I've heard about your great Flower Bridge. So we know that it's bringing in people from out of town. So in terms of concepts that people have talked about, I think the Flower Bridge raised a great one. Do you put a gazebo in its place at some point for weddings? that's covered that can handle flood areas? Do you put in bathrooms for the trails for events? Do you go back to its original use as a canoe club? It was originally a canoe club. We found out from a resident who emailed us. So those are all sort of potential opportunities there. I think, to your point, Peter, you know, this board may change. I might not be here by the time we do something with it. But at the end of the day, you still have the land and you still have the potential. And I think we have an obligation, as Teddy Roosevelt said.
Wow.
He really made the point that then, you know, a nation behaves well if it treats its natural resources as assets, which it must turn over to the next generation increased and not impaired in value. So it is consistent with the values of this community. As a community, we're going to be judged really on what we preserve and what's important to us to keep. And I think that we have a lot of people here that value the natural resources, the charm, beauty. Every time I go door to door to people, these are the assets. And not only the assets for enjoyment, they're assets for economic development. They bring people to town. So we sort of looked at it comprehensively that way. But to Moira's point, it is a consensus building. We do need to reach out to the communities and see what the community wants.
So your whole board, you kind of went over what some of the conversation was, the thoughts, and why you passed it? That's how you thought it was definitely a driver?
I can't speak for the whole board because I'm here myself, but yes, I believe it is an economic driver, and I believe, and you can speak to that, that other members felt it was an economic driver.
Certainly the belief.
Was there any consensus from either the Board of Selectmen or the town officials, those of you who are here, that this building isn't a maintenance nightmare? Or is that for Betty Hudson?
Well,
I mean, does anybody think that 5 years from now, if the town acquires this, that building is going to be there?
Now, can I just speak to that? One of the reasons we need to preserve the building right now as we evaluate it is if we do a swap or if FEMA gives a grant, sometimes what they will do to encourage the grant is say, well, if you destroy this part of the building, we'll give you a grant. So sometimes that can be used as leverage as you go and pursue grants. So we want to leave that as an option and not take that away and have a granting organization say, well, we would have given it to you, but you already got rid of the structure. We wanted to incentivize you to get rid of it.
How much of a grant are we talking about?
Well, that's what the town staff is exploring right now at the First Selectman's direction.
Well, the building is only going to be used for seasonal purposes. I can't imagine why we would heat it and keep water and electricity running there in the middle of the winter.
I don't think there's any intention, Nick, that we're going to heat it and to run electricity.
But I'm really bothered by the idea that 5 years from now we might be spending $40,000 or $50,000 a year to try and maintain that building.
That is absolutely not part of the plan right now. I think there is definitely a request before you right now for the money necessary to take the building down. What needs to happen is that the building needs to be preserved for a sufficient period for the town staff to evaluate whether or not there are any FEMA grant opportunities, as Lisa suggested, whether or not there is any particular advantage to constructing other facilities there that would be more weatherproof from maintaining the footprint. That is really it, but I would be very surprised if in 12 months there was anything standing there at all.
So that's why short-term plan, that's why they put the numbers in.
Exactly, but there is, I mean, this is not about rehabilitating that property and running electricity.
We're not going to lose the footprint. I mean, there's a concrete foundation in the ground there, right?
It is really just to make sure we don't close out any options, Nick. That's the whole thing. And we have been in touch with FEMA, but they have not been entirely responsive on that.
Linda, you've been waiting patiently.
Well, I just want to go back. There was some discussion about, or questions about what's the potential cost if you didn't knock the building down, and I'm hearing you more and more say that, 90% chance you're going to knock the building down. But, I mean, there's still the potential of entertaining alternative uses and repurposing of that building. And as I understand it, there are probably potentially some FEMA rules that actually limit how much you can spend to repurpose a building. And so in terms of people's questions here about, well, what's the outside cost if you were to repurpose the building, I believe that might be a known figure and that you might want to address that.
Yeah, normally under FEMA rules, if you exceed 50% of the value of the structure in terms of your renovations, then you need to comply completely with the regulations.
So what you're
Which
saying is, if you buy it for 150 grand, you can't actually spend more than 75 grand to refurbish it if you decide to keep it.
The cost of the structure, I don't know exactly, there's a whole process of assessing the value of the properties.
It'd be a pro rata ratio between the
less.
the land, and it'd be less.
It might be even less.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
So, I mean, it does give you, and the reason I want to bring that up is it gives you some comfort that there is an outside number. It's not like you're going to wind up spending $500,000 building the Taj Mahal there because it wouldn't be allowed. Am I correct in saying that?
So that would, can I just real quick on that? That would, this is exactly anything, that would address the potential investment, but then if we're investing in something else, what's the maintenance of what we're buying? I'm sorry.
Well, let Jeff's ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to foreclose discussion. I was moving this forward so that, and we can continue discussion with that previously. I know it was cut off, and I know that you all would have,
My left side
additional
doesn't work,
discussion.
so.
But in any event, I mean, I, at our last meeting, didn't have a full understanding of the more comprehensive plan and the various benefits of this acquisition. And that's why I had, at that time, felt uncomfortable with moving ahead. I think with Peter, based on what you said earlier, am very comfortable with moving ahead. I've done a lot of work in the meantime to investigate this further, to talk with people, to better understand the plan. It is consistent with the plan of conservation and development. Having shared economic development, the commission many years ago, and having worked in economic development, this is really almost a no-brainer. When you think about the town of Simsbury and what we stand for and what holds up our property values and what brings people to this town for tourism, and the reason that we have so many volunteers in this town who are maintaining the beauty of this town, this is entirely consistent with all that. It is, an experience here that you create and that we have created and that we need to expand upon and maintain. And I look at, for example, the opportunities for the kayaking. There really aren't. I mean, Joan, you mentioned a bunch of places which unfortunately don't really exist for having the kind of kayaking operation that would really benefit downtown. When you think about this being a wedding destination, for example, and the great places we have in town for weddings, I mean, for the picture opportunities down there, it would be great to have a location. We also had bathrooms down there, the proximity to the bike path. From a tourism perspective alone, the money hands down is worth it. So I mean, I encourage everyone to continue with discussion. I've done my homework. I've had all of my questions answered, and I'm comfortable with moving ahead with it.
Why don't we just let Maura speak, and then we'll start talking about motions. So, Maura, you have...
So to the point of whatever ongoing and recurring costs may be associated with the purchase, is it intended that those would then come out of the operating budget, or it's like an operating budget going forward? Because the other thing, mothballing or putting it into storage temporarily, is always, the process always takes longer than you think it's going to take. Consensus takes a long time to build.
If my comment earlier that, and Tom affirmed that this would fall under Parks and Rec, then I think, yes, obviously it would be in the operating budget. Now, I have some concerns about how well Parks and Rec maintains some of the stuff that we've got, whether it be the access to some of the trails, mowing and bike paths and so forth. We've got lots of places we could spend $150,000 on.
Correct. And during the last budget cycle, we heard several times about needing to decrease the amount of land that Parks and Rec, Culture Parks and Rec needs to take care of, and now here we're moving.
Can we speak to that? I mean, part of the reason that I'm, and Joe hasn't spoken to the financial capabilities of buying it. And one of the things, maybe Joe, why don't you kind of go over your financial piece here, so I won't steal some of your thunder, but...
No, all I did was generally recommend that you guys take the appropriation out of fiscal year 14 fund balance. Right now would actually be the time to do it because we're about to close out the audit in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
But how did we end up with some of that fund balance too? Is we did sell another piece of land?
Yeah, the sale of Farrell's Farm. You guys would be keeping with open space mentality if you're using some of those proceeds to hypothetically purchase.
Now, is there anything else I know we can't talk about if there's anything negotiation, but is there a possibility of other sales?
So I would say the town will always try and leverage whatever resources we have available, whether it be open space or property that's sellable. We'll absolutely look into all avenues, and we have been. And we'll continue to do so, but probably not in a public fashion for right now.
Please.
One of the things the Board of Selectmen did ask the town to start looking into is prioritizing. I'll let Hiram speak to this as well. What open space the town has. Some of our open space that we maintain and that is an ongoing cost to us doesn't have public access. So we're looking at evaluating and prioritizing our open space and perhaps exchanging some. To Joe's point, we can't talk about specific properties that we're considering, although I will point out that a year ago we did only grant a one-year lease to the Dewey Farm because we wanted to evaluate what to do with that property long-term and whether it's an asset, because it doesn't have the same river access as the Hudson Farm. You can't really get to the river from there. You can have the view, but you can't get to the river, whereas the Hudson location does permit public access, and it is located next to a tourist attraction. We haven't made any decisions on that, but we are certainly looking at prioritizing and thinking about how we are using our open space. And I'd let Hiram add to that if you want.
Sure, there are a number of different ways, obviously, to preserve the open space that is adjacent to a particular development. For example, there are 3 or 4 different ways to do it without incurring the costs of the ongoing cost to the town for maintaining that. So we're looking at that now. We're looking at all the current open space that we have and be meeting with Jerry and Jeff in the next few weeks to talk about what the potential for the different alternatives that we might have with regard to that. Planning Commission, I might add, has taken a very, I think, proactive approach in our recent subdivision regulations. We've redrafted them to have what's called a fee in lieu of open space portion of the regulations now, so that if someone comes in with a development, the developer can offer the town a fee in lieu of providing that open space. But each one of those is looked at on a case-by-case basis, so there are money that actually be going into an open space fund. The land will still be preserved, the town will get money, and the town doesn't have to pay for it. It's kind of a win-win-win situation.
So we better set up that open space fund, and we've been talking about the rules?
Yeah, we just accepted the first proposal to that last week, I believe it was. So that will be hopefully coming forward more and more in the future. But we think it's just a smart way to do business. We can do the same thing and preserve the same amount of land for the same ultimate effect.
Well, let me ask you this. If we were on this trade mentality where this is, we want to do this because we can't use it and buy this because we can, would this be on your buy list? If we didn't have this opportunity, would you say this would be on our buy list, this piece of property?
Same to me.
Well, who's ever going to work on that?
I'll tell you from a hazard mitigation standpoint, if I could. I think that was mentioned before that the hazard mitigation plan that was recently passed specifically proposes to purchase and remove structures that are within the floodplain, the floodway if possible. Just from a strictly a long-term potential threat to life and property, I think it's a smart thing to do. It's a half an acre. It's in a great location, strategic location as far as I'm concerned. I think it's a wise thing to do.
It's also right in line, as has been said, with the POCD. There are policies out there that would counsel this.
I'll now entertain a motion.
I so move that we appropriate $200,000 for the acquisition of 1 Old Bridge Road.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Can we still have discussion?
Still have discussion.
I have a couple things. I think the key that you just said on that is acquire and remove property from the floodplain. And my whole concern on this is that we're not getting a commitment for sure that we're going to remove it one way or another. And yes, there's a limit to how much we can invest on it, but I don't know, maintaining bathrooms or whatever else the vision is going to have an ongoing operating cost that's going to increase our taxes in Simsbury. And so I think that's all, well, it is, because I know there's an economic benefit to business owners, and there's a social and there's a value to having it because it will increase people wanting to come to Simsbury. I get all of that and agree with it. But there is a cost. There's $5,000 less in taxes, and then there's going to be potentially a maintenance cost here that we just don't know what it is. And maybe it'll be small, but I have no idea. And that's kind of the threshold question I asked is, can you give me a range? So do we have any feel for, because that's our really responsibility of Board of Finance, is to look long-term on what, you know, what we're doing to the town and where we're going with this. Having said all that, one of the other issues that Joan raised, which I think is a good one, how do we know we're paying the right price? And again, as a Board of Finance and our role, it's not really our job to make sure that this is the right price, it's the town's job and the Board of Selectmen's job. So I think from our role, we have to trust that they've done appropriate due diligence and that 150 is market value for that property, and that means in theory somebody else would pay 150 for it, not just us. So I don't know whether, you know, they've done that, but I think that's not our role to second guess the price. I think that's their job to negotiate that price. So my big unknown is just still ongoing costs associated with it. And I'm happy to know there's a limit on further investments, but I think we need to put our arms around that. And the other piece that I think I might have heard a little of an answer, but I don't want to put any words in people's mouth. I raised the question, why does this have to be done immediately? I understand it just went on the market, and it's an opportune time, and I'm not against this investment, but I do like things to go through the public process so that it gets full public hearing. And we do have a public hearing tonight, but I'm not sure that all of the public really knew we were having a public hearing tonight to be able to come and speak pros and cons to this. So I wondered why we couldn't have put it in the budget cycle when we have a more formal public hearing where we still don't get a lot of people out, I'll say that, but we get more than we have here of the general public to kind of talk about, well, not special interest, we would still get the groups out, and I appreciate that you guys are coming because that's all valuable input for us, but it's just the understanding of do we have to do this right now? Or is there some time, and can we just hold the deal till we go through the budget process and not lose the deal, but just is there a chance it can hold?
So there's always that fine line between what's within this board's purview and what's in another board's purview, and I know you and I often differ on this, and I guess I often view you as crossing that line, and when I look at this, we're talking about the sale of a home, and so typically, and when winter coming and what have you, and people put their home up for sale, they typically like to sell their home, and we did hear tonight about taking it out of the inventory, so you don't have a bidding war for the property. It is well below the assessed value. It is well below the appraised value of the property. It is sounding a bit to me like part of it is a donation to the town because she is accepting far less than what the value of the property is. I wish we had this much debate around, for example, the Ethel Walker property with regard to the cost of maintaining it. Because
we asked all the questions.
Well, the cost of maintaining that property, though.
We asked them. We just got told there wasn't any.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't involved at the time, and again, I don't want to bring that up for debate. I'm not second guessing any of the decision makers on that, and the town had an opportunity to vote for it, and the decision was made, but. And there are other alternatives and options for how that might be maintained, and the town is looking at that. And again, the Board of Selectmen has responsibility for that. I've had ideas that I've directed their way. The Connecticut Forest Association, which manages open space in 96 towns now, I believe they're involved with McLean. They draw on hundreds of volunteers a year. People sign up, as I'd mentioned in an earlier meeting about when people adopt a highway, people sign up to adopt trails. And people who are lovers of open space could participate through that kind of organization or another nonprofit we might participate with. I look at the Flower Bridge and the amount of work and what they have done to create, again, a sense of place here, which just enhances the value of our town exponentially. The $5,000 is a drop in the bucket when you compare a vibrant downtown that will be facilitated in part by the preservation of this area for the Flower Bridge and for the access to the river. So I look at the $5,000 loss, and again, I think it's a no-brainer. And the town of Canton had an opportunity to purchase that golf course for whatever amount they had to purchase it for, and many people kick themselves now in the butt for not having purchased it. People who like to shop maybe have a different view, but again, this is this is really a very small amount of money for what I think will gain the town a lot of long-term bang for the buck.
Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Linda, some thoughts?
Yeah, I have a number of comments to make, and I will be supporting it. But you know, I've been a long-term advocate of trying to get more access to the river. I was really pleased when the fair weather report, consulting report, came out and rightfully identified that we needed, especially near downtown, more access to the river. I think that's, you know, I've joked often that if anybody's been to San Antonio, they've got this pathetic little 2-inch deep, stinky, muddy river that goes through town, and they've turned it into this amazing economic generator. Not that I want us to have stores on either side of our river, but it is sort of astonishing to me that we've got this fabulous asset, which is the river, running through our town, and yeah, you can get to it from Curtis Wright Park, but it's a narrow little, it's really not a good place. It's not a pleasant place to go sit and have a picnic. So, you know, I've advocated that we have access, and I've advocated that we use land that the town actually already owns along the river, which was when we last met, part of my concern was, well, why are we buying something when we already own land right on the river where we could have river access? And so I needed to take the time, and I'm glad we didn't get pushed to make a decision last meeting, because I did take the time to go to the property and walk around, and I didn't feel that anybody was here 2 weeks ago to articulate a real vision of what could this be. And I'd never walked into the backyard of Betty's property before, and so I did do that. The house is vacant now, so there was nobody there to yell at me. And, you know, quite frankly, it was a lovely, sunny day, and I stood in her backyard and was impressed. It's very pretty back there. I could really envision families picnicking, sitting at tables, enjoying the river, walking easily. It's not like you need to build a boat ramp, walking easily into the water, either to play in the water or to put a boat in or out. I mean, I really could see that there was a lot of potential there, and that, you know, I understand there are sort of new floodplain rules that affect Simsbury Meadows that might make it more difficult to try to build a park like this there. And this is a kind of unique opportunity. So I sort of came to feel that there was some real potential that we wouldn't want to miss, and that as much as I'm, you know, a tightwad when it comes to money, 150 grand to buy it isn't an enormous amount. I'd like to see us think about, and I understand we're moving towards getting rid of the house, but think about some opportunities to have a rowing club. Have storage space there, you know, to look at, you know, I think it's unfortunate we don't have a river center. That's something I've advocated, and Rick and I have met with Mary about it in the past. Like, we should have a river center where there's educational facility, where people could, you know, rent a room to have their wedding, whatever, you know, just as they have in Hartford at Riverside Park in Hartford. And so, I suspect we're not going to go in that direction. I think what is a concern to me is that, you know, we don't really have a good sense yet of what we're doing. It's uncomfortable to be spending the money without having a better sense of what we're going to be doing. And I know everybody's saying it's going to take a long time, and so I want to express that I hope to heck it doesn't take as long as you're saying, because I'm going to be very annoyed if it does. And I think the Flower Bridge people will be as well, because having that house sit there for 2 or 3 years like the house did on Dewey property, I'll be ballistic, because I don't think anybody wants to look at some slowly deteriorating, ramshackle piece of mess like the Dewey house for 3 years sitting next. And I know this is, you know, like how Barbara gets upset about the paving on Carlton Street. I get upset about Dewey because I drive by that messy property 3 times a day at least. So don't get me going on that one. But so a few concerns. There are a number of relatively small cost items. I know you were trying to think of every potential cost, but if we're 90% leaning towards getting rid of the house, I don't see why we need to do rodent control. I don't see why we need to be cleaning the furnace. I don't see why we need to change the locks, just get Betty's keys and lock the doors. I mean, there are, there's some expenses in here that I don't think are necessary. I think we really want to see you immediately convene a group, and people are committed to doing it. I'm certainly committed. I think we could convene a group and make a decision quickly, keep the house, not keep the house. That shouldn't take a year to get to it. And then, as I said, it shouldn't take 2 years to knock the house down once you've decided to do it. And I think part of what's persuaded me to also feel more comfortable is understanding that the Board of Selectmen and others, the Open Space Committee, have absolutely talked about selling other pieces of property. I think the town has collected this enormous mishmash of little bits of property here and there, some bigger than others. And there's no point of us owning all this property unless it has a real open space value, much of which it doesn't. So if we were to sell some of those properties, you would replace the $5,000 in revenue because those would become taxable properties, and you'd have money enough from the sale to cover the cost of the house. So I feel like we're not actually, damaging the budget if we're going to move in that direction. And my last comment is I think we have to, and this is a bigger issue than just this property, but I have ongoing concern about parks and recs. They are over budget and understaffed already. Adding one more property, I know it's only a small property, it's just death by 1,000 cuts for them, and I think at some point we have to fairly start looking at doing something to help parks and recs. So all of that said, and with those caveats, I will be supporting the purchase.
Can I just really quick one last?
No.
Okay.
Nick, do you have any thoughts?
Only your motion includes money for contingency, right?
It does.
Yes. That 200 includes it, right?
Laura, do you have any thoughts?
No, I think everyone agree with a piece of what everyone has said, so.
Yeah, I spoke my piece. I'm in favor. I think the river is an asset to this town. We saw Farrell's Farm being sold. The land trust helped us out there. The money's there. From a financial decision, the decision's easy. We have it. We had a good year. We can take out of 630-15. We still have reserves to put in. We're solving a lot of problems. Going back to that budget, we're solving Simsbury Farms. We're lucky enough to have some money to be able to afford this. If it was an issue of where it's coming from, maybe a different discussion, but now we know where it is. We're hearing that there's going to be others, which makes it easier to have an open space fund. And I like the fact that the town's moving in that direction because we've been buying a lot and now we're strategically buying, which makes sense. I've been around 18 years. We've done a lot of buying, not much selling. So it's good to hear we had some selling. And
would you clarify? You said 630-15. I think Joe said 630-14.
Sorry, 630-14. We're having a good year, and I think hopefully 630-15 is a good year too, based on all the development you see starting to happen around town. So I think things are starting to break a little. So I think from the financial standpoint, I don't have a problem with it. I like the river. I mean, you and I, we've rode by there, so we know what the property looks like from many angles. So we've been on the river, so it's definitely an asset. And I drive around there all the time when I get my ice cream, and go down there. It's just a nice place to go. So I think there's a lot of possibilities. I have total confidence Board of Selectmen, whoever does the plan, will come up with a good plan that's good for all parties. And I think the finances will not get out of control. And if they are, we'll just say no. So just remember that. And, I think everyone understands what they have to do. So Barb's concerns can be addressed, that we're fiscally responsible here and we're not creating a money pit, so to speak. And that's a valid concern, and that's a concern of our board. And so we have to listen to that, and everyone has to be aware of it. And we have good memories, so we won't let you forget about it. So with that, I'll call a vote. All those in favor?
Did you still have something you wanted to say?
Just, if you don't mind, just real quick.
Okay.
I just want to say, I too actually support this. I have to ask those questions because I think that's our job on the Board of Finance, to be fiscally conservative and to push and to make sure and to get commitments wherever we can on what things down the road are going to cost. So I too think, probably Rich Wagner put it in the best description, this is a truly unique opportunity at not too high a dollar cost. And when you put those two things together right now, with our role and Peter's comment that we can find the money right now, I think it's an appropriate thing.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for all the input, we really appreciate it.
You're welcome to stay.
You don't want to hear about capital, not recurring funds? It gets real exciting now.
Yeah.
Jeff's off.
I've got my statutes I printed out here. Linda, in the interest of full disclosure, you're not the only one who's trespassed.
I'm what?
You're not the only one who has trespassed. I mean, we'll go for a bike ride, get food downtown, and trespass on private property so we can have a nice lunch down by the river. And I feel guilty, but not guilty enough to
All right, now we're going to move on to
have the experience.
the new capital non-recurring fund that we started talking about our last meeting, and I just felt that, obviously there's some confusion. It's a new concept, even though capital non-recurring isn't a new concept, but how do we intend to use this to achieve some of our purposes? So I asked Joe to kind of walk through everything and give us a little presentation, if he would.
A little presentation, all right. What we had talked about was thinking about ways to show it financially and how it would look.
Is that different than what we already got?
Yeah, can you just clarify, you sent us something, that's the existing policy?
Yes.
No. What I sent you guys was the capital non-recurring fund.
Right.
For comparison.
Oh,
So that's essentially what we're
This is the
trying to
savings
model
fund.
on.
Right. The existing policy you sent
It's
out.
the existing policy.
So is what you just handed out now
This is
any
gonna be
different
a-
than what you handed out 2 weeks ago?
No.
And just for the record, the existing policy is riddled with typos.
Yeah, we should update that too while we're doing it.
Yes.
Right, that's why by handing
I
that
marked
out,
that up
I think
beautifully.
you'd realize
That's from 2002.
that needs an update.
Yeah.
That policy needs an update, but the
2003,
framework,
yeah.
we want to work off the framework.
Got it.
That plan
Yeah.
needs some work because it hasn't been updated in a while. And you can see there's a few years of updates in it.
Yes.
There's a lot of cleaning up that policy needs. So I put that out for the framework and also to say it's going to be on our list to work on updating it too, so.
I look forward to that.
Joe can't wait.
Okay, so what I tried to do, and this is actually, looks pretty difficult to see up there.
I'm stuck sitting in
We're
this
not,
place. where I
you
can't
got
see
to
a
blow
damn
that up for some of us older people there, Joe,
And you know what, Joe? I can never see these things, so you need to bring paper copies because unless I move, I
Yeah.
can't see anything on the screen.
Linda, you want to come over, we need a
Probably
chair,
you
want to
can't
get
either.
her over here? Why don't you come over here, why don't we get the chair,
And then we can't see that far.
See it anyway.
I can arrange for paper copies for you guys, so just 1 second.
You can't see it anyway.
yeah, I don't see it too well from here, especially that.
Yeah.
Peter, this is not.
It's not approved font. Somebody had a certain.
You need to put old people font.
I just want
in there.
regular size, that's all I asked for, don't shrink it down,
Yeah.
just keep it regular. Not reading the stock report, I just want it regular print, I can read that fine. As soon as they shrink it, they have a little trouble.
Nothing less than 12 point, please.
I just want to say I appreciate everyone's effort on at least clarifying our concerns on the other issue, because as you can tell, we were, a lot of confusion in our last meeting, and it's important that we get all the facts, especially on a financial decision, so we really appreciate that. So,
Sorry guys, I didn't know it was gonna look that bad. We're gonna have a real tough time writing the budget.
Oh, no, so Joan gets it first. Ooh, Joan.
She's gonna ask for it anyway.
This way she gets it free.
Well, she gets,
If it's given out during the meeting, you don't have an option.
You want to see the report? You want the report? Huh? Then I want a receipt. Are you sure it's okay?
I'm 100%.
All right. So I tried to break this up into two components. The top part is just the spend to save fund. So there's two things that occur, right? You have the fund where you are spending the money. So in this case, it would be $500,000. That would have to be an appropriation that's somehow put into a capital non-recurring fund. The way Peter and I had talked about it, which was basically to transfer money from the general fund over into this fund, and then you would spend it out of there. So the way it would
well, general fund for this first year,
correct.
to give it a start,
And then,
And then if you determine that there's excess in years, you can put money into it if you have excess in your reserves. You know, you're having a good year, you can transfer money over there, but otherwise, there's no money.
with the exception of the repayment period, which is what you see, where you see fund repayment $50,000. Now, this scenario uses a 10-year repayment.
Oh, no. Infringing on your territory here.
Sorry, I noticed the years reset.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you what those meant.
Yeah, no, I apologize for that.
Just the last two are wrong.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's a
2022.
10-year window. I know we had talked about maybe it being something different, 5 years, 7 years. For this scenario, it's just 10. And then down below is how it would look in the general fund. So in this scenario, I said this project will save $85,000 a year. You'll save that in perpetuity. But for a 10-year period, you're going to have the $50,000 a year, or 10% of the total expenditure, that have to go back into the fund. So every year, the general fund will recognize a $35,000 benefit. So why set up a plan like this? Because otherwise, what we would have to do is spend the $500,000 either out of our operating budget or borrowing for it, and you'd experience a one-year impact of the savings less the total expenditure. You're not really, a model like that doesn't incentivize people to find projects like this.
Or the vendor, you fund it through the vendor and you get no savings in your budget.
Correct.
I mean, if you go to a vendor and say, hey, you do this project for me and I'll pay you back, you get no benefit for 3 years on the payback or whatever it is.
So what some vendors will do is they'll say, if you're spending $100,000 a year on your electricity bills now, we'll do these projects for you, and you're going to continue spending $100,000 a month. It just might be $50,000 worth of electricity and $50,000 to the vendor to pay for the capital expenditures.
So the key to this is a good way to look at it, the 35,000 savings a year that you've got on this example.
Yep.
That we can trace it and see it, and it really comes out of the budget. That's really the key.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's always going to be a volume and a rate variance, right? Because utility rates typically go up, but I would expect to see usage go down. In that example of it being a utility one, yes.
You can use it for other things, though, right? No.
Yes, absolutely.
And in the lowest part of the example, the savings might not start in the current year, right?
Correct.
It might, everything be pushed out another year.
Yeah, in
I mean,
the
you may-
last scenario, you recognize the savings
Yeah.
in year 2 all the way out, but
Yeah.
you're just really burdening the general fund.
Well, to me, when Burke said if we spent, what, 240,000, we save 122, that resonated with me.
Sure.
I mean, that's worth trying. How do you do it? And through a general fund, that's hard to do because they got to take it out of their budget. If we do it through a capital fund, it doesn't fit. And if we put it in our current capital non-recurring fund, we make them pay it back in 5 years, so they might not get enough incentive. So I said the only way to do this is to set up another capital non-recurring fund, same concept. And it's not a fund that we, even though we put the provision in there, that 1% rule, but you put money in it. So we say we got X dollars in here to spend, and we have a way to replenish it by the chargeback.
Right.
So we can keep this going, but it kind of jump starts, it gives them a real incentive to want to save some money. Now, some of the issues are, the way capital non-recurring works now is we say there's X dollars for Board of Ed, Y dollars for Board of Selectmen. How do we deal with that? Don't know the answer. The way this was written, that's not the way it should happen. We didn't write this right. So we have to look at that, because it's not, I don't think everyone should go through all the boards, just like the capital non-recurring is. We set the dollar amount, each board decides what they want to do, and the discussion. The way I look at it is whoever comes in with the biggest savings probably gets the money, in my mind. If somebody can save the town 50% on the expenditure, and it's ongoing for 10 years, and we know that, and somebody else comes in with only 20% savings, I'd rather give it to the 50.
Sure.
Or figure out a way to do both.
Or do both, some way to do both. I mean, so from our standpoint, do we want to use a fund like this and make it separate than the fund we have? So that's what we have to ask ourselves in our mind. How do we fund it? And what I'm recommending is we take extra reserves, because in our reserve policy, you know, remember 2 years ago, we transferred money into the other capital non-recurring? We could transfer X dollars, whatever we pick, over to here, and put money in, and we could even fund, you know, from 14, some money, from 15, we can't do that till January if we know there is some, and then through the reimbursement, you get money, so you can jumpstart this savings. Now, then you'd say, how does the expenditures work? And what the capital non-recurring now is goes through the budget process. So the projects are listed, they bring them back, we talk about them, right? Each board brings them in through their budget, and they have a special thing, capital non-recurring, tab in the budget, and then the voters look at it and decide. So it would be the same way. You know, it's not outside the process, it's part of the process. It's exactly what we're doing now, except the payback period is maybe 10 years or whatever we decide versus 5. That's about the only difference I see in the purpose. I think we have to be careful when capital non-recurring is really for equipment. Certain items, there's a certain definition, might have a statute definition, and I know there's an accounting definition on what you can really truly spend that money for. So I think it has to have a certain life. It has to be a certain dollar threshold. You know, it can't just be for some supply item. You know, it's got to be truly for an equipment or a certain dollar threshold. So I think we have to be careful that we list that right when we draft this fund up. If we do
improving the service.
Yeah, well,
And that's the way I see the big difference.
yeah, I was going to say that we should include, I think, language from the statute when we do finalize the policy statement. And I looked at the statute, and I looked at a bunch of other towns' policies, and I like this idea, Peter, very much, because I feel like, unlike the current CNR fund, this incentivizes, I think that's a word, or incents, the right behavior, and that's what we want to do, is we want to encourage money-saving behavior. And under the state statute, the use of the fund shall be restricted to the financing of all or part of the planning, so planning is included. So to your point, Nick, you know, it can be for planning, construction, reconstruction, or acquisition of any specific capital improvement or the acquisition of any specific item of equipment. So it does need to be a capital improvement. It can't be something that you would typically, through your operating budget, fund, and obviously it can be for a specific item of equipment as well. So if you've got an item of equipment that will revolutionize a certain process in town to save the taxpayers money, I mean, that certainly would fall into that category.
Burke, what was your project? What type of items was it that would get the savings?
The two primary areas are energy efficiency, lighting, as well as some of the controls, the HVAC.
Those are control panels or control motors, or what are they?
Some of it is a lack of the controls to define, you know, in a more specific way when the system comes on and off. A higher
setting time of day,
sophistication. That was part of it, and then a lot of it was LED lighting versus other types of lighting to upgrade. The exterior lighting at the high school being really the largest ticket item, although there was lighting throughout two different schools. Henry James and Tooten had two smaller amounts. The largest was Simsbury High School. So we have up to 3 different projects that we could do.
So they meet the definition, those projects, you think?
So could you use that one as an example?
Yep.
The LED lighting example? The 10 years has me a little nervous that it's long. And as an example of LED lighting, I mean, obviously it's the light fixture, not just the bulbs. But does a fixture last 10 years? And is that a realistic payback period? Or do we need to be thinking about it somehow to match the life of the asset that we're acquiring? Absolutely. Because if you're changing, if the technology says 5 years from now we're going to have new kinds of light fixtures anyhow, is that an example where 10 years might be too long?
That's a good point.
I also said that to Joe, that we need to have it not just be 10 years, but the lesser of 10 years, or
the useful
the
life.
life of the thing, or not more than twice the actual payback
That's what we talked
period.
about, yeah, last meeting. I like that.
Peter, what does that do to the fund? Could you put things in at different lives and all into this, or what is that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, if we make it a flexible fund, I mean, we're now, it's a unique fund. I mean, it's a capital and non-recurring fund, so it's just in the balance, it's going over with the other one right next to it. And it's just that when we approve a project, it has to meet the definition that we want, and each project can be unique.
And it's gonna have a project number, and you can track it and all
We can
that.
And have a
track it.
separate life.
Yeah, sure.
And you are going to want to track it, because you're going to track the savings.
Make sure it's
You want to make
real.
sure that right,
Not everyone will have a 10 years. Hopefully, they all have 10 years, but some,
they might not.
I thought I saw,
Some might go in
it probably has to have a certain
perpetuity.
life, I think. There is 5 years, I think, is
Yes.
in the counting definition, is usually 5. What does our current policy have?
I think 5.
You're just,
Yeah, we talked last time about knocking this down.
I think our current policy has
5
10
years.
months in a 5-year period.
5-year
More for
period,
one
so
5-year period.
that's the kind of language, we'd have to say at least 5 years, if not
Minimum
more,
of 5,
minimum of 5 years.
Yep.
You know, and that's how we write language like that.
yeah, well, what we don't want to see in here is the same kind of stuff we've got in our current CNR fund. I don't want to see lawnmowers and
No.
Zambonis and things
No.
like that.
Well, not unless it's a real efficient Zamboni, Nick, yeah.
Right, if the Zamboni gets you half the cost of running.
He wants to have a ride on the Zamboni, we'll give him one.
The statute actually talks about, too, making annually available information and data on the condition of the fund to the budget-making authority and to the public, and it'll be part of the annual report of the municipality.
Right, so we
I
did that.
do remember seeing in one of the policies as well, semi-annual reports for monitoring, so we could also include that in our policy if we wanted to really stay on top of it every 6 months, get an update.
Right.
If that was a decision of the board.
So can I make sure I understood? So the Board of Ed has a project, or you have two parts of a project, maybe even one project. Part of it has a useful life of 5 years and part of it has a useful life of 10. Sorry, I'm talking like corporate America, but that's kind of the concept of how long you depreciate the asset over. So would you take that and put that into two different streams, and they pay back half of it on 5 years and the other half on 10?
That's, if we did that, that's what you'd have to do.
Okay,
yeah.
and that's that's not nightmare for accounting?
Right,
Or
it's
that's-
Depends how many projects you guys approve in a year. You know, if you guys are doing 20 projects a year, no.
But, I mean, from them to come to us, they have to make sure on a 5-year that it's got at least 20% savings, otherwise it doesn't do them any good.
Right.
So, the one he brought up had significant savings, it was like 50%.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we have, and I'm sure there's motors, I'm sure we could, the sewer plant has some great opportunities, even though we rebuilt it only a few years ago, they've come a long way in 5 years. You know, motors, and they have their own funds, which we could not use the towns, but their reserves, do the same thing with them. So there's a lot of possibilities if we get this concept going on where to help them save in their operating budgets. The goal is to lower the operating budget, to save the taxpayers
Yeah.
money. And if it doesn't do that, we don't want to do it. So in other words, we have to see the budget savings. So somebody says, my budget's 1.5%, we're going to save you $200,000 because of what we do here. Their budget just went down up 200,000, and it's not 1.5%, it's 1.5 minus the savings.
Right.
And I think we got a kind of mechanism to try to see that so we can articulate it.
All right,
Joe's gonna
I
have
can
to-
have that for the next meeting, but I hear, so what I'm gonna do is put something in there about useful life.
Right.
Have, you know, the lesser of the two, either useful life or a 10-year repayment period. We should probably have a dollar threshold too.
Yeah, minimum of so many dollars.
And we talked about not more than twice the length of the real payback period. I mean, if it would take you 3 years to pay off, for the savings to equal the cost, then it shouldn't be more than 6 years. At least that's where I would go.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you end up stretching it out and there's too much chance that the savings aren't really real. And
Also, we have to get a verification on the savings. I mean, how many hoops you want people to go through? I mean, we need some kind of verification that we have savings.
But we don't want to have to hire someone to track it.
Right.
Well, I mean, usually you can, you know, if you're smart, you get a vendor to do that for you.
Well, but we're
They're-
doing this all in-house.
But they're trying to sell.
we're-
No, the vendor on the
we're
project.
outsourcing our utility bills now, so we will have this at our fingertips, at least for that.
I like that idea.
But there's a lot of free advice out there that you don't have to go through their service, but you can get the same information.
the other thing, and you mentioned this earlier, but it's not what it says here, is under funding, the very last line says that we could levy an annual levy not to exceed 1 mil for
Yeah, you guys didn't
funding
like
this.
that last time.
We don't want that.
That's in your CNR policy too.
Yeah, but I'd rather do
That,
what Peter
people
said,
somehow
just
stick
take
that
it-
in as
Yeah,
standard.
take that out and say it comes out of
We
reserves.
we don't pay, we don't tax for that. We
Right.
put money in that when I think we sold the South School, put money into this fund. That's how it originally got funded. Then through years, we've transferred extra money from reserves. And then we set it up so there's not, equipment's not going like this.
Yep.
We try to get a smooth stream of equipment, and it's worked quite well. And basically, the boards have feathered it in, so they have this ongoing amount in their budget to keep replacing equipment.
Yeah.
And this fund might not work that smooth. This fund's going to probably be a little bit more.
Right. But I think it's a
Jerky.
pretty hard sell to tell the taxpayers that we're raising their taxes by a mill in
Yeah.
order to save them money.
And the genesis, I think the genesis of that is that the state statute talks about how the fund will be procured, and it gives 3 different methods, and one is that you may levy
But we don't
taxes
have to
up to.
adopt that.
No, we don't have
No,
to.
we do not, absolutely not. And I think it's up to 4 mills now. It used to be 2, and it was raised up to 4.
Remember, our prior finance
So-
director said, well, we'll just put this in the budget. I said, no, that's not how this fund works.
No.
It's self-sufficient. So it caused some confusion when we went through the budgeting process, that we have a positive fund balance there. It pays for itself. That fund is ongoing. Once we set it up, it just keeps revolving. So
Yeah.
what I envision here is this is a jump start to savings. They're going to probably have to go through some vendors too to get some savings 2 or 3 years out, because I'd love to have a goal of $200,000 to $400,000 a year in savings. We can't fund enough to get that goal every year. We don't have enough money to fund that unless they can find 100% savings in projects.
Peter, could you walk through the math of that?
Sure.
There's that little IE, if the town expects to approve 500 a year, 2.5 million needs to be funded. How does that work? If you do 500 a year,
We're not going to do 500 a year.
but if you did, how do you get the 2.5? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, Joe did a full spreadsheet.
4.5 times whatever the annual expenditure is. Yeah, let me see, I might be able to do it right now.
You did that little spreadsheet for me on the phone. You
Yeah.
were talking, you probably have it.
Oh, you know what, I sent it to you, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
He returns your phone calls, huh?
What did you call?
He's going to call
I
15
call
times
everybody.
straight. That's what I did.
Peter calls from different numbers. So.
I
He wants you to pick up.
Oh, Peter.
Yeah, I figure out.
You didn't expect me to be at his desk the other day.
Yeah, Nick answers the phone the other day.
It's a scary
Uh-oh.
What do you want?
You're double teaming the poor guy.
So
huh?
we're
I think
this is
it's
back to Joe to
This, yeah,
keep developing.
Keep it developed. I mean, here's what has to happen if we want to do this. 6/30/14, we still have money available. We just appropriated 200,000. There's about 400,000 left that are going into reserves. We're over our 12%. Correct, Joe? We're over our 12%?
Correct.
And our policy says we should be doing something with it.
So we do something with it. We're probably going to appropriate some money for Simsbury Farms to solve that budget, the hole for this past year, and it's about 190. So there's probably 150 or something left. If we wanted to start this fund off, we could put 150 or so into it, if we want to do that, but we have to do it by next meeting.
Yep.
So the pressure would be, do we want to set up a fund, as we're going to have to ask ourselves for the next meeting, do we get the right framework of the fund? If we want to, we can say we want to set this fund up, and if we get the proper framework and everyone's comfortable with the language, then great. If we're not, at least set the framework up, subject to the language being approved, transfer the money, because we run out of dates for that money. So we start a fund. We can then get additional money in if they find projects for this next budget cycle in January out of the 6/30/15. You can say we can put another 150 in.
Where's that coming from?
Well, it'd have to come from that 6/30/15 budget year
From
we're
next,
in,
next year's.
if we're on a good year.
Oh, if we have an excess at the end
If
of
we,
next
if
year.
we determine, I mean,
We
if
usually
we
do.
determine we have an excess, if our expenditure funds are in good shape, if our tax collections are above, but, even though we lowered or raised the collection rate, we're gonna get less in revenue, but, we won't know till probably January how the taxes are going. Or probably in February. I think that's when you get a real good feel on the taxes. So we'll know if we're on a decent year or not. So we have an opportunity to take some more money there to jumpstart it. And hopefully they have some projects that they say, gee, guys, if I had 400,000 to spend, I can save you guys 200,000 in your budget.
So if we had 400, they have to wait till we get that all funded before they can do this?
Well, no, we have to approve it through the next budget cycle. First of all, we have to have a fund.
Right.
So this is just setting up a mechanism to approve it through the budget process.
And I was going to ask whether the next meeting will have a pretty precise idea of, since you're getting ready to close the books, of what amount over 12% we have available.
And
We will absolutely know, because the audit will be done by the third week of November.
I'm going to have to close down, close the books down.
Contact, I can't tell.
Yeah, you are. Are we? We had this conversation today, so what?
It's getting there.
Getting there, all right.
It's gonna be
And
bright,
I
I'll
know
tell you
at
that.
12%, we kind of have to do something, but if we wanted to,
We don't have
we
to.
don't.
We don't have to.
We could put more than, I mean, and
That's
take our
right.
reserves down to 11% if we wanted to, which would actually be all right. with
Yeah, I think we ought to, I still like put my toe in the water before I jump in. I just want to make sure it's deep enough here, so, you know, there's many ways they can get the savings. The point is, we start the ball rolling, this starts it, we can show taxpayers we're using their reserves to save some money, to save them some dollars on taxes. They can go through vendors too, they can do a combination, but the vendors will take a few years to see the full benefit, but this we'll see immediately. So if we give them 400,000, hopefully we can promise 200,000 savings, which is a quarter of a point off taxes. That's worth trying to go for.
Right, but you're saying we won't have 400,000.
We won't have it for 6/30/14, we maybe 100.5 too.
I'm just saying, we could actually still get it to 400 if that's what it takes to do
Yeah,
this
you could.
important project. We can.
If they say we got
take
to.
Out of reserves.
Right, if we can save 80% or something, if we spend more, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
To save money, we'd have to listen. So that's the concept.
So Peter, I think that we all approve of the concept.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know whether we'd even vote today if you wanted on approving the concept. I think we have to work through the details.
Yep.
The one thing I would like to see in the policy, and I don't think we need to get to all the details of it yet, but I'd like to see, at some point, corporate America doesn't believe this, but at some point, there aren't cost-saving ideas. Sooner or later, you know, that there's no blood left in the stone. And so what happens to this fund then? So we ought to at least, you know, if it hasn't been used in X years, or there ought to be something in here that just relooks at.
Our board has the ability to transfer the fund balance back.
Right.
So we can state that in there, that if it's not used, that the fund balance reverts back to the general fund, if it's not used for, let's say, a 3-year period or something.
We should probably do something like that.
But I mean, we have to keep the fund open to collect the repayment.
Yeah, and ideally, we'll find some that are in perpetuity.
Right, and I mean, and let's say we put 500 in,
But
we
you
thought
don't
they were
write
great
anything off
projects,
over forever.
all of a sudden they didn't pan out, and maybe only half of them did, and we say, you know what, they just can't find the savings, we don't really want to do it, this is not going to work. The ones we spent, we just keep it open to collect, the rest of the money we just transfer back. So we'll just make sure that we can do that and everyone gets comfort level.
I was going to say that there is a provision for discontinuance of the reserve fund, and you would understand the terminology better than I, but it said that such fund shall be converted into or added to a sinking fund to provide for the retirement of its non-serial bonded indebtedness. If we have no bonded indebtedness, such funds shall be transferred to the general fund of the municipality.
Right. Well,
What is
We do have bonded
non-serial?
indebtedness.
we have debt, we have indebtedness, we don't
It's
really
not
have
serial.
a debt service fund for the bond, you know, used to have that fund, you can set one up. That's, means, you know, you can also put reserves into that for future bond payments, you know, or you just prepay the bonds.
Is that the sinking fund?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had one?
We did that for, when we did the high school, we put some money away up front so we could afford that high school. We started, I think we were, I tried to, and we were trying to get ready for that. Yeah, we were, that was a big nut to digest when we financed the high school. That one cost us dearly. That and the Ethel Walker land were the two biggest expenditures I saw in our tenure.
But you may recall, we had more arguments over the lights out of the football field.
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, you can see where the passion is in this town. You know, we saw tonight where some of the passion is. You know, sometimes it's certain, you find out where the passion is. So I think we saw some of it tonight. So everyone agrees with the concept. We'll draft a better language. We'd like to see people weigh in on some of the drafting.
We don't have to have that done by next month, or next meeting.
No,
right?
but I'd like to have a better idea. I'd like to have a better handle. I mean, it depends on Joe, his schedule, and how he can help. You know, he's kind of straight out with the auditors these days, right?
Do you want us to take a vote now? I mean, I think Barbara's right. I think we're all in favor of the concept. We can just-
Technically, it's a special meeting. I didn't say we're going to vote,
Oh,
so
yeah,
we
we
probably
can't.
can't.
Oh, okay.
So we'll vote next time. I don't think we can vote without so noticing. So, and we didn't put on here adjourn, but if we're done with this,
We're done.
we're done.
Special meetings don't need an adjournment, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for the extra meeting, but I thought that other issue needed some more explanation.
Can I ask a stupid question? How do you turn this off so it doesn't?